Hello, I'm Joshua Bidwell, and this is my post-mortem for the mobile game Island Hide. I'll start by summarizing my reflection report I wrote midway through this last trimester. The summary is that I don't really have anything to evidence any game design or level design skills in this project. I tell myself I didn't have time for it, considering I had to program everything and it was much more complicated than I thought it would be. And my focus on the graphics of the game and how everything went together. And not just the graphics, the sound effects. I definitely enjoy programming and animating more than game design, more than laying out objects in a level. I'm interested in user experience, but really only the shallow stuff, like how responsive and superficially appealing the visuals are. So a major issue with the project was that the gameplay became quite complex, and that was difficult to program for. My original game concept was simply a gardening game where minimalistic resource management entailed the entire gameplay, and it turned into a virtual pet and a gardening game, but it wasn't really great in either of those respects. When I show people this game, the most common comment I get is, "It's really pretty," and yeah, I have to agree. Definitely, it's the prettiest game I've worked on. Put a lot of thought in the composition. I've blurred the textures in the foreground and the background so that your focus is in the middle, and worked on the color harmony so that nothing's really in your face except those interactable objects. The last thing I worked on was data serialization, so saving the trees and the creatures. It is a lot of work, something I left late, and I could have been doing a whole lot of little polished things because I had no idea how many ways and how many pros and cons there were to do data serialization. At the moment, I'm just saving the position of the creatures and the position and type of the trees. I'm sure if I was thinking about data serialization from the start, I wouldn't have programmed, structured a whole lot of the scripts the way they are. The trees especially are incredibly inefficient. But the root cause of this issue is just, again, it's kind of trying to be two games in one. It's like a gardening game and a pet game at the same time, but it's not good at either of those things. So it is much more complicated than the original game. And I've determined a lot of the reasoning for that is I've been very passive with my collaborators. A lot of features have crept into the game just because I thought it would appeal more to my collaborators, such as the increased complexity of the pets. And I believe last trimester the pets were merely decoration that rewarded you for growing a diverse garden. So that definitely, that has definitely sunk a lot of my scripting time. If this was just a gardening game, it would certainly have seedlings and a gradual growth, so like a reason to put effort into a certain arrangement of trees. If it was just a pet game, I'd have petting at the moment. We've just got picking up and feeding fruit, and of course using their abilities. There is a major design flaw in regards to the pets and the trees. and that is if you've got a pet that can burn down the trees, and if you burn down all your trees, you've got nowhere to go from there. And so I've got a reset button, but my original idea was to have the merchant done, and the merchant would give you, like, depending on your game state, it would give you like a bailout, to give you fruit to feed your creatures to grow more trees again, or something like that. With my physical and mental illness over the last month, and the time sink that was serialization, I didn't implement the merchant at all, which is a huge shame because I chased up the assets for it, much to my mental exhaustion. I truly believe if I respected my initial vision and I respected myself and I took more of an assertive stance on that original concept, it would have been a very polished, a very pretty game that wasn't nearly as convoluted as this. I would have had time to spend on serialization, on mobile optimization, which is also a huge sink. I have learned to atlas all of the textures so that the GPU is only drawing from one texture for the entire background and for all of the UI. We didn't have too many development or asset issues, and I'm sure most of them come from me not being really assertive as a creative lead, as well as none of the collaborators really working on a complete game before. Unfortunately, the previous projects they had worked on didn't really come together well. So that first problem was, let's talk about the 2D art first. Technical problems included sprite sheet slicing. So my graphics collaborator had the job of making the character sprite sheets, and over the last break I updated the project plan to step through how and why the characters should be on one sheet. So the biggest problem I had was, and this is why I've updated it, the original character sheets had their graphics overlapping. So if a rect were to be drawn around one part, it would unfortunately have another part overlapping, and so you'd see bits of different parts of the character just cut and sticking out randomly. My graphics designer had never worked on a game before, never made a character sheet, so that was a lot. And then after that, our problem was with any updates to the character sheets having different parts moved around, and so that sheet would need to be resliced and meshes would need to be remade, and that was a lot of work just because my graphics designer thought that it would be nicer laid out a different way. So those issues arise from a lack of understanding of the entire pipeline. So having this, and maybe in caps, do not ever move the objects of a sprite sheet, like that might have helped. The next issue with the game assets would be perhaps the mismatch of the game audio. That currency update sounds very bit crunched, very old school, whereas the music and the character cries are quite natural. There's a few others that aren't in here at the moment because I tried to get it all sounding similar, sounding consistent, but I'm pretty sure that's mostly my fault by having multiple audio references. Some references were for really old school games, and others were more natural and modern, and so I've certainly confused my audio collab there, and it's not his responsibility to think about how all these sounds go together. My collaborator did show a lot of initiative though in asking for updated builds of the game so that he might imagine how all the sounds go together during the gameplay. That's an important note that I've been reading in a few project management blogs, that it's really good to keep your team updated on milestones and production and give them all access to the weekly builds or the repository. Just because repositories have been a nightmare in the past, I only gave my animation collaborator the repository details because I thought there'd be a whole lot less problems. But then I had to manually upload builds to Google Drive and share them whenever there were some major changes. And if you're working on a project, there's going to be major changes every week. If you're doing work, there's going to be big changes to show. The game can change a lot with one change. Like if I added seedlings and the growth over time for the trees, that would change a lot of the way the game plays, the pacing, and that could come into the audio and the animations, which derive from the pacing of the game. I found that the game is quite meditative in its pacing. It's quite slow and chilled. You don't feel stressed or rushed to do anything. I've quite enjoyed this actually. I was thinking of adapting it to be more of a therapy game, but I definitely have to simplify a few things. At the moment, the creatures are just tools that you use to grow and destroy trees. That there is value in being a virtual pet just for the sake of it. Just keeping something alive and letting it grow over time. So if I simplify the rest of the game, I could give some love to the little creatures and have them grow maybe from a baby stage to an adult stage over a long period of time. So that's a long-term goal and reward for the player. Another problem we had with the graphics early in the production was that there was no color harmony, that a lot of things blended into the background or into each other, such as this green pet being exactly the same color as the jumper, like all over. It's a little different now, and that's got a much darker tail. And this fruit was one, it was exactly the same color as the foliage. So that's a common thing for the fruits, so adding like a pattern, such as on this pineapple here, has helped that a lot. Generally the fruits are slightly higher saturation and lighter in color, so they pop a little more than the trees they grow on. And anything that's not important is like a dark, low saturation magenta. Onto project management again. I had an issue all through both trimesters working on this project in regards to our schedule, meeting deadlines, and my collaborators consistently working, even if that's just a couple of hours a week. I put a lot of effort into this delivery document and my asset lists. I'm still not sure if I prefer asset lists like this in a spreadsheet over something like Trello. The good part of it is I can put in any details or column I want and make it very specific, very clear that there are things that are very important to this asset. It's not just going to have a paragraph description and it's done. Like it needs to have reference link and a delivery document, delivery location, sorry, and a file type and file name. This is quite clunky to all spell out, and then in something like Trello and in the spreadsheet, you've got the benefit of filtering and sorting by type or by file name or by who's assigned. So if I remove Merrill from this one, you can see that I didn't have a whole lot of sprites. The custom formatting and status. So if I change this to not done, it's black. If it needs testing, it's yellow. It's kind of like almost done. If it needs revision, it's red, so that everyone knows that's a top priority. While this asset list in a spreadsheet works well, I have run into a problem where some collabs might just set the status to done for something that definitely needs testing because we weren't sure how the whole thing was going to go together, or it needs revision and there's comments on that. In Trello, if someone marks something as done, you just make another card that says revise this thing, and you put their name on it and a description of why. Although both Trello and Google Drive can be linked to Slack to show updates, these kinds of documents are updated so often that I find the Google Drive updates are ignored. So that is something Trello has on top of that. The other thing is Trello is much prettier. I don't know who put his background in, but it's definitely more appealing than the boring spreadsheets that look really serious and overwhelming perhaps. You just need to make sure that every important part of the description of each asset to do is laid out in each card. I know that it's not very efficient doing both. Collaborators only want one point of call for each of their many projects. That was definitely the case with my collaborators. They all had many bigger projects than mine. So if they were paying attention to Trello, they weren't paying attention to the delivery document or the schedule here. Although this is good, the Hawkeye charts are good for a group project at school perhaps, where people really have to pull their weight. If you are contracting collaborators for assets, it's much more important that you just describe the quality of the assets to be accepted in a delivery document or art bible prior, and make sure that the contract specifies that closeness to the art bible or the delivery documentation is a variable in your payment. Considering all that, in the future, I think using Trello by itself and just reiterating everything that needs to be discussed in regards to revision in every single card is a better way to go, because when I asked for feedback from my collaborators, the communication and the planning, one of the most common replies was that this was frustrating, that they just wanted this to be green, they just wanted it to be done, ticked off as done. I think using cards and then having revision cards with a description of the revision and the asset that you want to be revised would make it feel like the collaborators are moving forward in their work a lot more, especially when there's a few problem assets that are constantly being flipped over to needs revision. The collaborators can feel very bitter about that specific asset and that work, and they may not feel passionate about it anymore or creative. So in the future, I will continue using Trello and link it to Slack. We had a lot of chat drift over to Facebook Messenger, which just became a distraction. That chat got a little bit backed up with socializing as well, so I will use Messenger to bump people, to push them towards the Slack, but having Slack linked to Trello, linked to Google Drive, where Trello has the updates for the different revisions filtered by user, and Google Drive just has updates to assets and like build versions instead of every little document that the designer or the programmer is editing every day. Another reason to use Trello over my spreadsheets here is for the schedule or milestones. I had a real problem with my complicated game design where you couldn't really play the game or imagine what the game was going to be like until very late, because there was so many pieces for me to script, so much functionality to add before you could play the game. You know, it took a long time to get to picking up the pets, moving them to another location, having them eat the fruit, that level, like increase their ability meter, having those abilities do something to the trees. It was all quite complicated, and only a few weeks ago did it all come together nicely and I could start adding polish and consider the overall design. That's the only time that I thought, wow, you can really paint yourself into a corner with the creature that can burn down trees. So you can really get yourself stuck. That's really poor game design. I was doing a lot of bug fixing as I went, trying to write good code as I went, but if I had figured out that having the complicated pets and the complicated trees together was not going to be fun and there was going to be a whole lot of design problems, I would have started with just one or the other. I would have rescoped much earlier on, and that would have simplified the code, simplified everything. So in the future, I will be setting very structured milestones for a feature, for, say, having pets that you can feed a fruit that just exists. You know, that should have been my first feature. I didn't really decide which features I was going to do first, and kind of did them all at once, so that I could, you know, write elegant code. I did it all at once instead of bit by bit. So I might have found out it's not fun to like just have fruits, to feed the fruits to the creatures in a certain way. It was overly complicated. I might have found out in playtests that my touch controls were very difficult to understand, and that players, especially younger players, just wanted to tap on things, and I should have enabled that. So in summary, I have a list of best practices for development of a small indie game with a couple of collaborators. The first point is try and understand and respect what you want to do, and look for people that complement that. If you love UI animations and particle effects and VFX, don't find someone that just wants to do that as well. If that's the one thing you're passionate about, find someone that's just passionate about programming or creating assets. Keep it simple. Stick to your original concept, your original aesthetic. Don't let scope creep as you go. If you've got a very simple design, you should have it in a GDD in a couple of paragraphs. You should have the intended goal and the gameplay nailed down. You won't know if that idea is any good unless you get that idea out instead of changing it as you program. So respect your initial vision. Understand the knowledge and abilities of any collaborators. Consider what they've worked on and keep that in mind, because you may or may not have to work a little closer with them. If you're the creative lead, respect your own vision and assert that role. And likewise, if you're not, respect someone else's creative vision, because they're the only one going around looking at all the pieces and how they fit together. So you have to respect that. Use Slack and use the plugins for it that let you know when tasks are updated and when new builds, for example, have been uploaded to Google Drive. Cut your gameplay into features, the most important features, but of course, if it's simple, you should have most of the gameplay in the first feature lock, and then everything else is a bonus. You can just, if things don't work out or everything's on fire, you can at least polish the original core concept and that first milestone, that first feature. And yeah, don't bug fix, don't worry about your code until you've got the features done, until you know if it's a fun game or not. This note here refers to whether or not you should bug your collabs to get their assets done, to get their work done. You should only be sending weekly emails and a weekly reminder in the social media chat that they're probably going to use. Because if you've got their assets set up on a priority for your features, they're going to be doing the next feature that you're not even up to, that you're not ready to polish. So if you have a set of features that correspond to the priority of your collaborators' assets, you don't need to stress or worry about bugging them constantly. Same as the code. You can debug it when it all works, when you know the game's fun and it's worth spending time on that code.